But then, how do we change this narrative? You are in the realm of educating the general public, public at large, but then the academia, even now, is impervious to these ideas. So, how do we actually change this narrative? Changing the academia again, it will have to be preceded by a huge debate, academic debate, scientific evidence. So, how do we actually counter this narrative?
In the academic world, the debates and conferences don't go very far. What is accepted is journal published papers. So if I have a thesis, I need to publish it in some journals that will be peer reviewed. And the problem really begins there. It is not a very idealistic scenario. So if I send a paper, for example, to the journal called Nature, Nature's editor will want to send it to some experts, 3 or 4 experts, to find the quality of the paper I've written, are there errors, and so on. These people would be grounded in the old way of looking at it. So when a revolutionary idea comes, they are unable to critique it well. Yes, evolutionary ideas are okay. Existing idea, if you change a little bit, they are okay. The methods of science will let you see, is that valid, method valid, all these kind of things, and make critiques and give referee comments and get it published. Revolutionary changes are difficult to accept for most people. So such kind of ideas are very difficult to penetrate into academia. So that is one of the issues that we are facing. So one thing that people like me can do is write popular books for consumption. These books can be very well researched with references.
By Mr. Srikant Talagiri.
Right. With a lot of references, deep references and footnotes and such things, we can make it academic. But then the other side must be willing to engage. In my experience, I've found that the other side is unwilling to come to any workshops that I organize or any discussions. They don't even want to acknowledge that such ideas exist. That's one form of defense. If you cannot counter it, you don't even, you ignore that side completely.
Acknowledge its presence.
Yes, you don't even acknowledge its presence. So that is what is going on.
But then the problem in India is the governments change very often. And the history also changes whenever the government changes. There was an attempt during 90s and early 2000, 2004, 2005 to change the textbooks, to change the syllabi. But then soon the governments changed and everything came back to square one. So this is one problem. The agreement, unlike in the West, there is an agreement, basic agreement, regardless of the political affiliations, of a narrative of a history, a particular narrative of a history, which we don't have in India. We have an alternative narrative which challenges the, challenging the one that is actually traditional. The Indian history, the ancient Indian history upholds. So we have a Marxist narrative, we have a leftist narrative, we have a liberal or post-modern narrative, subaltern narrative. So they keep changing the textbooks every 5 years, 10 years.
So it requires that we have to acknowledge we have an identity problem. We have to acknowledge that the Indian student cannot get a healthy identity with what is being taught today in the class. If today, like you correctly said, if the sociological models in NCERT books are talking about oppressor, oppressed, who oppressed whom, who's the victim, and so on. If the student in the class is told that that student sitting in the first bench, he's responsible, his ancestors are responsible for your poverty, how is he going to have any kind of positive feelings towards that student? When you cannot even have unity in the classroom because of this identity politics, then where is the question of national unity? So it's up to the government to realize what is our identity, what is it that we want to teach our children. For example, United States, they control their identity very tightly. They have the story of American exceptionalism that is taught to students right from the beginning. They are not going to allow any Marxist to come and rewrite their history for them, or some Britisher to write their narrative for them. Americans are doing that. Proud American intellectuals are doing that. Same thing in China. Proud Chinese intellectuals are writing their history. They're not going to let a Britisher write their version. Yes. In India, we don't have ownership. So I think it requires at least an ordinance or a constitutional change where we say this is our identity as Indians. We need to connect to the ancient Bharatiya civilization because that is the reality of who we are. I don't care if this country has got many people of different faiths, and to accommodate them, I'm not going to talk about my culture. That is the stupidest thing I've heard. Because this is a reality. Just because we talk with the reality of Bharatiya civilization does not undermine the other person's identity. If he wants a religious identity behind closed doors, please have it. But then your ancestors are also participants in this Bharatiya culture, Bharatiya civilization. Why don't we tell the truth about that? What is so-called saffron or any of this? These are ridiculous labels that are put to undermine and to reject the Indian civilization.
The dominant American, identity is that of a white Anglo-Saxon.
Right.
Despite having Christian,
Yes.
Protestant Christian
Yes.
rather,
Yes.
despite having a plethora of micro identities, this is the dominant identity, and no one disputes it.
Nobody does. And they say, in God we trust.
In God we trust.
And the God is very clear. It's the Abrahamic God that we trust. And they are very proud about saying that and going about talking about American exceptionalism. So why is it that our intellectuals can't do that? Why are we muted? The minute we raise our voice, we're muted. And I believe that is only because of identity politics. So it requires whose identity is it? Whose country is it? Whose narrative is it? These questions must be debated at the national level, parliament level, and then we need to change our constitution saying that unless we can allow our children to acquire a healthy identity about our history, about our past, we cannot have national unity. That realization must sink in. So we should remove the toxic content out at the very earliest and change it.
Well, as an NRI, you must be meeting a lot of Indian diaspora across the world. So, how do they look at India's history? Do they feel that Indian history should be, sanitized, or are they aware of the history? Do they suffer from an identity crisis?
So, good question, sir. So, when most of the Indians go outside the country, they definitely became aware of their identity because they are aware they are in a foreign culture. They are aware they are living in a foreign environment, foreign customs, foreign everything. So, they become acutely aware of their Indian identity. Then the question is, what is that identity? So, people who don't have a strong grounding will easily submerge into the host community. For example, you become more westernized, that I'm more of a Bible, sneer on this culture, go. At the same time, there are people who will strengthen their identity.
Yeah, they go back to their roots.
Very true. In fact, I find much evidence, at least in the United States, of Indians who support the Indian culture strongly. We send our daughters to Bharatanatyam classes. We send our daughters and sons to various music lessons and things of this nature. We have got Balavihars. We have got various Vedic heritage classes. We got yoga classes. So we find that NRIs are more willing to hold on to our culture because they know the danger of living as a minority. They know that. They know that within a few generations all this will go till we value our systems. So I find that there is more propensity in NRIs to hold on to culture than happening here. So I drove around in Hyderabad and along with a friend and asking where are all the dance schools, and they said there's one dance school over here, and they pointed out a certain dance school, and that's the most famous one. There's not many over here. Ideally, in a place that has 7 million people in the city, 6 or 7 million people, every street corner must have people because everybody must be proud of expressing their identity, connecting their identity in some way. Ideally, we should have that many. But unfortunately, we don't. We seem to take a very lax attitude. We are more eager to quickly imbibe the Western identity and to show how progressive I am and to show how westernized I am, because that's an indicator of my whatever, these kind of things. However, when these people go abroad, they will realize the value of an identity.
It's all boiling down to the clash of cultures, clash of narratives. So, finally, as we end this interview, what do you have to tell the Indians who are actually in the eye of the storm, who are actually facing an onslaught from all sides and are blissfully unaware of the attacks that are coming on them? So, what kind of what message do you have for them?
Very good question, sir. Very good question. So I urge all the Indian people who are watching this interview, regardless of the religion or their background or other things, to try to connect to the ancient Bharatiya culture. We have always been told that our goal in life is to dispel the avidya about our existence, who we are. And that is done through a process of acquiring knowledge. So if somebody feels threatened by Hinduism, I still say your ancestors had a quest to acquire knowledge. So acquire knowledge. What is that knowledge? It doesn't matter. Any knowledge you go sufficiently deep will make you into sufficiently a spiritual person. Even if spirituality is not the goal, I request Indians to try to learn about their history. People may say, I don't have a guru, I don't know how to learn about my culture, nobody's there to teach me. These excuses will not do today because we are in a digital world. We are in the presence of Google and other things. Even one Google search will give you hundreds of documents, videos, and other things. So start learning. Initially, the learning could be difficult, we don't understand it. But watch 1 or 2 videos, read 1 or 2, download some PDF documents and books on culture, on history, on religion, on philosophy. As you read more and more, your maturity, the subject will increase more and more. So try to internalize, my request to the youngsters and others watching this video, try to internalize the message our ancestors have given us to go on a path of knowledge. Go on that path. Don't sit down and relax. Go on that path of knowledge. As you go on that path of knowledge, your identity will become clearer and clearer to you. So I request that let us go back to a knowledge-based society. That is who we were in the past. That is who we should be in the future. Not just people who are blindly chasing capitalism and enjoying life. That is also okay. But the point is also become a knowledge-based culture. And knowledge does not mean using technology. That is not knowledge. Knowledge is understanding the philosophical roots of who we are as a people, our heritage of the sciences of the past, and how we can contemporize these things into the future. So that's my sincere request to the listeners.
Thank you so much, sir. It has been a pleasure having you here. Dhanyawad.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Thank you.
మా వేకప్ ఇండియా .tv లేటెస్ట్ అప్డేట్స్ ముందుగా మీకు రావాలనుకుంటే సబ్స్క్రైబ్ చేసుకోండి. అలాగే పక్కనున్న బెల్ ఐకాన్ను క్లిక్ చేస్తే ఆల్, పర్సనలైజ్డ్, నన్ అనే ఆప్షన్స్ వస్తాయి. అందులో ఆల్ అనే ఆప్షన్ పై క్లిక్ చేయండి.